Well, hello, authors, and welcome to the second half of your Tellwell Editing Process webinar. I'm your host, Simon Ogden. I'm Tellwell's in-house editor, and today I will be taking you on a sightseeing tour through the processes and tools you will be using to edit your magnum opus and to interact with your editor within your document. We'll get into the workings of the software we use and the actual recomposition phase of your book's preparation. Let me just bring up our slideshow here. All right, in the previous editing webinar, which you can watch or rewatch through the links below, we discussed the specifics of the job of a good editor, how they are here to be your book's greatest champion and to support your unique voice. We talked about what type of person worked here in Tellwell's editing department. They are seasoned professionals with a caring and supportive approach to their work and to your work. We talked about the types of edits you can purchase through Tellwell, being an editorial evaluation or an overview of your book's strengths and weaknesses detailed in a report to you, copy edit to fix grammar, spelling, syntax, the basics of a professional manuscript. There's a full 2-round substantive edit, the first round to address logic, clarity, cohesion of plot at the structural level, followed by a copy edit. And there's the proofread, a final run through, basically, for glaring errors after the design phase. We discussed what you will need to begin your editing. You'll need a good computer with an up-to-date version of Microsoft Word and a complete draft of your manuscript on one single Word document to send in. And we talked about what to expect back from your editor after editing has commenced. Which brings us to today's webinar. What to do with the edited manuscript that is now open and glaring expectantly at you from your computer. The topics of today's webinar are reviewing your edited manuscript, working with Microsoft Word track changes. We'll get into that quite a bit. We'll talk about comments and rhetorical questions that you get back from your editor, what they are and what to do with those, how to prepare your edited manuscript, and how to submit your completed revisions on your edited manuscript. Following this webinar, I will be sticking around to answer any questions you might have in a little Q&A segment we'll do. So go ahead and pop anything you need a bit of clarity on over in the questions section to your right. You can toggle to the questions section at the top of the side window there. With me, as always, is Allison, the head of our department. She will be behind the curtain responding to any comments that might pop up through the presentation. But if you would like a more in-depth answer from me, again, just drop it in the questions area and we will discuss it following the talk. All right, so let's dive in. Let's talk about reviewing your edited manuscript. This is what you get back from your editor. We'll begin by talking about how to review the edited materials and what you will see when you open the email from your editor that was sent to you through Octavo that contains your edits that you're about to work with. You will see in that email 3 files awaiting you. 2 of them are different versions of your edited manuscript, and one, the last one, the third one, is a reference document. So the first one is labeled as your project deliverable file. It's also subtitled the substantive edited manuscript with changes tracked. This is otherwise known as the marked up copy, what we call the marked up copy of your manuscript. And this means that when you open it, you are going to see words track changes in action, words editing functionality in action. Your pages will be covered with all sorts of various markings in splendid colors. And you'll find a sidebar now on the side of your manuscript with a series of notes left for you for your consideration as you revise. This may very well look overwhelming at first when you first open it, but by the time we're done with this webinar, it will all make sense, I promise. We'll get into what track changes mean specifically very shortly. But for now, just know that your project deliverable file is the one with all your edits visible on it, and that's the one that you will be working on, actually making your revisions toward your next draft on. The other 2 are simply supporting documents. So those are labeled supporting files. The first one is called substantive edited manuscript. This is the one we in the biz call the clean copy. It's a copy of your edited manuscript with all of your editor's suggested changes already accepted and integrated. This is just so you can have an easy to read version of the potential changes handy. It can be a bit frustrating for some of us to read a manuscript with all of the marked up changes, the edits littered all over it. So it's a good idea to have this document open on your computer as well as the marked up one, so you can flip over to it and read it in its clean form. It's already edited and accepted form, to decide if you like the change, and then flip back to your main document to accept or reject those edits. And as we always make sure to make clear, and I've said this a few times, every single change to your manuscript is yours and yours alone. Your editor at Tellwell will make no permanent changes to your book at all. This is one of the unique and wonderful things about self-publishing. All of it's entirely up to you. We're just here to help. There is a way to toggle your editing suggestions off in the markup copy as well, which serves essentially the same purpose as flipping over to the clean copy. I'll get into that when we're down in the technical section of the talk. The third file you'll get is also labeled as a supporting file. This one is subtitled Editor's Notes. This is a report that your editor has prepared for you to explain many of the things you'll find within the edit. Sort of guide to your edit. In it, you'll find a letter from your editor to you discussing various components of the edit, saying, what was wonderful and what you're going to be facing when you start work on it. And there will be a style sheet, which is standard for editing, any editing process that they put together for you. This breaks down the reasoning behind all the choices they've made, grammatical and otherwise, and there's many, many reasons they could choose to approach your manuscript in the way that they did. As a rule here at Tellwell, we follow your indicated preferences and style decisions, your style essentially. Every author has a unique style and we honor that. But in some cases where we want to make sure consistency is kept pristine, or a formal rule perhaps has been requested, your editor will look into an accepted standard for your project. And this will depend on the genre that you're working in, your location in the world, stated preferences that you might have. The source of that standard will be listed on your style sheet, be it a local dictionary like the Canadian Oxford Dictionary, say, if you're working here in Canada, or it could be a published style guide, like the Chicago Manual of Style is one we use quite religiously in North America. They'll list that on your style sheet so you know where they're coming from with those decisions. But remember, it's always your decision as the author and publisher of your book as to which of the recommended edits you'd like to keep and which you'd like to discard. Our best advice is always to duly consider each edit. And if you truly believe in the artistic merit of your original choice, you should absolutely stick to your guns and reject your editor's suggestion. But give it a fair shake before you do that. They're generally pretty sharp with this stuff. All right, let's get on to track changes. Working with Microsoft Word, track changes. Microsoft Word is still, and has been for a while, the industry standard software used for editing across the publishing industry, and therefore it's the software we use at Tellwell. It may seem a touch complicated at first because it covers your nice clean pages with all these multicolored lines and new words you didn't put there. But when you take a few minutes to familiarize yourself with how it works, it reveals itself pretty quickly to be remarkably simple to use. And we're going to get into that right now. So Word calls its editing feature track changes for obvious reasons. It does a great job of showing you what has been changed and why without permanently altering your original manuscript. There are two unique components to your edit, okay, that you'll find. They are inline edits. These are tracked changes within the body of your book itself, within your sentences. And there are the comment section along the sidebar to the right of the manuscript, which are individual boxes of communication, basically, from your editor to you. We call these queries. Queries can take the form of requests for clarification, suggestions of ideas to consider for rewrites, maybe, or rhetorical questions. We'll get into what all that means shortly. So to enter the editing section of your Word program, open your Word program and open your project deliverable file, the copy of the manuscript with your editor's marks all over it, and click on the tab at the top marked Review. You can see it there at the top of this slide. You will also see these buttons that are circled up in the taskbar in the review section, and these are the ones that we will be discussing. This is really all we're going to use, these and the accept and reject buttons. This might look slightly different depending on what version of Word you're using. Hopefully it's the most updated one, and again, always update your Word. And it might look different depending on whether you're on a PC or a Mac. I'm on a Mac, but you'll see the track changes toggle switch to turn the tracking function on and off. If it isn't toggled to off, if it's green and it says on, go ahead and turn it off right away. You don't need to track your own revisions, and your editors will just stay where they are. It won't affect that at all. And there are also two drop-down menus there next to the on and off button, basically, that are circled here. The top one is to indicate how much of the track changes you would like visible as you work. This is the one that you can see open. And the one below it offers various viewing options, but you don't have to worry about that second one so much unless you really want to go deep into the potential, like professional functionality of the program, but you don't have to, and you're not expected to here. I honestly, I do this for a living and I never change those switches at all. So, and you will see two buttons circled as well up there, marked accept and reject. Those are important. But first, let's talk about how to view your manuscript as you work through your edits. As we'll see, trying to read your book with your editor's suggestions all over it with track changes visible isn't easy. You're going to want to read the new version cleanly without the noisy marks all over it, so you can read it in its flow and decide how you feel about the suggestions and then act on them. Now, there are two ways of doing this. Okay. You can, as we discussed before, keep the provided clean copy open on your computer. That supporting file we talked about earlier becomes attached with your edited copy. And you can move that document along by scrolling it next to your marked up copy in another window that's open. And you can switch back and forth to read it in a smooth flow and then make your revisions on the marked up copy again. Or you can use that drop-down menu that you see open right here and switch between all markup, which shows all the colored edits, all your editors' work. And then you can click on no markup, and that will switch your file into the clean copy, basically what the book would look like if you accepted the changes. And if you like, you can click on original, which will show you the pre-edit version that you submitted for editing. When you decide which version you prefer, the original or your edited version, you just click on all markup again. You keep going back to that and either accept the edit or reject it. And we're about to discuss how exactly to do that. And then move on to the next edit. And you just go through the whole manuscript like this, each by each, accepting or rejecting each suggestion. So in a nutshell, you're going to be going through and accepting or rejecting each suggestion by your editor. And despite how frantic all this looks, these suggestions from your editor in the markup of the manuscript body will really only take the form of one of two options. It's going to be either a suggested change to the text or a suggested moving of portions of the text, and they're color coded so you know the difference. Okay, you can see the example here. So a suggested change to the text will be indicated to you by a single line struck through the word or the section of your text that your editor disagrees with or has a different idea for you. And then next to it will be your editor's suggested revision with a single line beneath the new words. They'll both be in a different color now than the rest of the text, which is usually black. Sometimes your editor may simply be suggesting the cutting of a word for pacing or to eliminate redundancy. So you would only see your original text with a line struck through it with no suggested replacement. Okay, and the second style of edit that you find here shown in green is a suggested move for the text. This will be indicated by a double line in its own color through a section of text, a word, a sentence, or a whole paragraph. It'll be in that different color. And this indicates that the text hasn't been changed, but simply moved to a different location in the manuscript. This could be because its relocation increases clarity for the reader or heightens suspense in the plot. The default color for moves like this is green, as the default for text change is red. But you can change these colors if you like, so it may look different on your computer. That's some of that advanced word stuff. So for moves, you just look for the corresponding text, which will have shown up in a different location in its original form, unchanged, just moved, and in the same color. And it will be underlined twice. So let me say that again in a simpler way. So text with a single line drawn through it means that the text is a suggested deletion, usually with replacement text next to it with a single line drawn underneath it. And text with a double line drawn through it means that the text has been unchanged, merely moved to a new location in the manuscript, where it will be found with 2 lines drawn beneath it. Super easy. So your job through revisions is to go through each and every one of these suggested edits by your editor and either click a button to accept it or click another to reject it. You do that in one of 2 ways, depending on your preference. First, you decide if you want to accept or reject the suggestion. Then you place your cursor anywhere within that track change. So just click your mouse or your trackpad inside of an applicable word or section, like the ones that you see here. You don't have to highlight it or anything. You just click your cursor right into an edit area. And then you can click on the accept or reject button up in the taskbar that we discussed earlier, as in the top image here of these 2. Or if you like, you can right-click your mouse or your trackpad, and within that options pop-up, you can see this in the bottom image here, you will find buttons to accept or reject that way. That's the way I do it. Some people like clicking up at the top. Both options do exactly the same thing. You just simply decide which is easier for your brain, basically. And once again, remember to turn track changes to off when you begin. Can't say that enough. Now, here's the kicker for edits where new text has been suggested. Okay, both individual sections of these edits have to be accepted or rejected. All right, the deleted text and the new suggested text. When you click accept, the editor's change becomes part of the manuscript, and when you click reject, your editor's suggestion just poof, disappears. The text goes back to the way you had written it originally. No harm, no foul. But make sure you accept or reject both sections of that change, the deleted section and the new text. Otherwise, you'll end up with both in the manuscript. You don't have to keep the editor's suggested text verbatim, of course. You can accept it and then style it your own way now that you've reconsidered the original. Now, this only applies to the changed text, not text that has simply been moved, which only has to be accepted or rejected once, either in its original location or the new one. So one click will, in either one, will take care of both accepting or rejecting it. So to restate this really quickly before we move on, with new text in a suggestion, you will accept or reject the deletion, and you will accept or reject the text added by your editor. Do not do one without the other. We will be strongly suggesting that you do a final read through of your manuscript after your revisions to make sure that you don't miss any of these. All right, now let's discuss the other kind of edit in the comment section here in the sidebar that exists now in your edited version. These are the aforementioned queries. So in amongst all the strike throughs and underlining and suggested text that we just discussed, you will see that some sections have been highlighted with a block of color, like you drew a highlighter over it. This indicates that there is a comment attached to that section of text, and there will be a little line attached that you can follow to read what your editor has written to you. Now, you may find a request for clarification there of a plot point, perhaps, some background information that might be missing, or some plot point or another is not making itself clear. And you can answer that query directly in the text by recomposing it for clarity, if you see their point, of course, and you deem it necessary. You may also find a suggestion of some description to add if the scene isn't set clearly enough to explain some part of the action. You may also find a rhetorical question in one of these comment boxes. This is a handy way for your editor to stand in for your future readers and their comprehension of the story, for you to consider further additions to the text. That's the rhetorical questions play a big part in how your editor will approach the work. So for example, let's say you have this scene here where your protagonist, your character that's driving the action right now, accidentally takes a wrong turn, say, and stumbles onto the stage of a play in progress. And for some reason, they're in their underwear. we can say that our author has done a wonderful job of describing the reactions of the audience as they laugh and point at our hero. But she has neglected to put in any detail about how our guy feels about the laughing and pointing, to contrast with the cruelty of the crowd. I wrote this little piece of text after I thought about this little scene, so they should match. So your editor might drop in a rhetorical question like we've done here, that says, and I'll read, how does our guy in the underwear feel about being laughed at? Some reaction here will heighten the tension. You don't have to respond to the editor in the comments. You would simply add something in the passage, like in the revisions, you just find a spot in that paragraph and type in something like, Leopold stood frozen at center stage, his feet unable to move as his face turned the same shade of red as his exposed jockey shorts, or something along those lines, whatever. You couldn't write anything worse than that. So rhetorical questions are just there to show you where you may be missing a bit of description or to flesh out some details. You don't have to respond to them in the comments section. In other words, the editor asks the question and you answer it for the reader within the text. All right. So just like inline edits, you have to deal with each comment as you make your way through the manuscript one by one. So when you right-click the comment box, you will see a few options, and you can see them here circled. On the slide, you can reply to comment, delete comment, or resolve comment. So when you click on reply to comment, you will start a little nested comment thread with your editor right there. It'll open up another bit of dialogue underneath your editors in the box, and you can respond to them if, say, they've asked for a specific clarification or really whatever else you'd like to communicate. This is only a consideration if you have another round of editing, by the way, following the one you're on. So this is really only applicable to the first round of a substantive edit, which I know most of you have. But in most cases, there will be no need to respond there in the box. So after you've made your adjustments to the text, if necessary, you can simply delete the editor's comment as dealt with and move on to the next. So that the third one, the resolve comment, will just gray the comment out. It sort of marks it as dealt with, but it'll leave the comment there. But there's really no reason to do that. It's good functionality, I think, if you're co-working in an office, but for us, your editor's only going to delete it on the next pass anyway, because it's been dealt with, just to clean the manuscript up before it's sent on to the design phase. So it's usually best just to simply delete the comment before we move on. Great. Hopefully that simplified things a little bit. We can talk now about preparing your edited manuscript. So let me at this point offer an important reminder. If you don't have further editing, okay, if you do not have further editing, make sure your manuscript is as error-free as possible. If you make any changes before you resubmit it into Octavo, if you're on the last section of your editing, you can only request minor revisions once your book has moved on to design. So this is an excellent point to be meticulous. Meticulous is our watchword as editors, of course. I know it will likely feel like a lot to go over everything with a fine-tooth comb again when you're so close now to moving ahead in the process, but this is a crucial stage to get things right. So take a bit of time right there. And if you do have another round of editing, make sure you give those revisions all the care and attention they need, and then get it back to your editor for the next round as soon as you can, right? We certainly don't want to rush you, but it's good to be a little bit expedient here, just so the product is fresh in your editor's memory. Your editors will have an avalanche of work waiting in the wings, and it'll be somebody else's voice that they'll be getting into. So it's in both your best interests to keep the ball rolling a bit. A 2 to 3 week gap is what we hope for between edits. It's generally considered the best time frame. And also remember that you always have the option of adding a proofread to your package if you haven't already, after the design phase and before printing. It's essential to the reception of your book, okay? Especially if you're planning on sending it out to reviewers, and you should seriously consider sending it out for review. It's essential that the final manuscript is clean and polished. So don't rush that final check. And as we mentioned earlier, make sure at the final editing stage that you've gone through and removed all the markup by accepting or rejecting your editor's suggestions, and that all the comments in the sidebar have been reconciled, deleted. The only comments that should remain are those directed back to your editor after the first round of the substantive, and that's before the final editing round. All right, submitting your edited manuscript comes next, now that it's all clean and tidy and looking great. This brings us back to Octavo. If you have further editing, the second round of the substantive, essentially, upload your revised manuscript to Octavo to send it back to your editor. And note at this point that if you have made serious additions to your book during revisions, and some people do get inspired and you know, a new chapter will pop up sometimes, there will be an increase in your word. If there's an increase in your word count, there'll be an extra fee charged per word for this second round. Not, you know, don't worry about that if it's, you know, normal additions in the course of your editing, but if suddenly there's a chunk more, that'll pop up, and there'll be a charge applied to that. Your editing services are now complete, and you will soon receive what's called an interior layout questionnaire. So you would upload your clean and finalized manuscript via this Octavo task link. And then it's time to move on to interior design, and that's an entirely different webinar altogether. And that about covers it for our editing webinars. Thank you so much for watching. That was a lot of ground we covered. So let me just list a few main takeaways that I hope popped out. The project deliverable file, first of all, the marked up copy, again, that's the one to work from. Remember that no editor changes are permanent. Each final decision is yours. Turn track changes off to start your work. There are merely two kinds of edits that will face you, despite the fact that it looks like there's a million of them. Those are inline track changes within the text and sidebar queries. Remember to accept and reject both sections of a change. Answer your editor's rhetorical questions in those comments with revisions, not in the comments. And of course, go through your final draft following revisions very carefully. Don't rush that final check. If you have any questions on your editing process, either from today or the previous webinar, just pop them in the question section and stick around, and we'll discuss the answers. You can always email us at support@tellwell.ca a little bit later on if some things pop up as this all sinks in, or you rewatch it to get some clarity in keeping with the editing process. And if not, great. I wish you all the very best with your editing and your revision stages, and of course with the rest of your publishing journey with us. Thank you for your time today, and I will wish you all very happy editing.